We're here, we're queer, and we love the Lord. That's right, you're listening to Coming Out Christian, a podcast about life at the intersection of queer identity and Christian faith. This fun, faithful, and sometimes irreverent podcast is a production of Love Boldly, an Ohio-based nonprofit creating spaces where LGBTQIA+ people can flourish in Christianity. I'm one of your hosts, Siobhan Boyd Nelson, and my co-host is the Reverend Dr. Ben Hillscamp, Executive Director of Love Boldly. So join us, and let's find out who's coming out today. Hello and welcome back to Coming Out Christian. My name is Siobhan Boyd Nelson. I use she, her pronouns. And right there across from me is the Reverend Dr. Ben Hillscamp. Hello, Ben. How are you? And happy birthday.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. I appreciate that greeting. Having just celebrated my third birthday today, but thank you for that. I'm doing pretty well. How's your Pride Month going?
It's going great. Busier than I intended, I imagine. We are, of course, recording this before Pride, but if I know me and at the ripe old age of 45, I do at least know myself a little bit. I have at least accomplished that. And if I know me, I am a little bit busier than I intended, but still having a good time and enjoying the hugs. If I have to be honest, Ben, it is seeing the folks you haven't seen for a year, you haven't seen for 3 years, and giving them a big old hug.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
I also hope that that's how my Pride's going. When this episode comes out, we will have just completed Columbus Pride.
Yes.
So I imagine that many of us will be sleeping a bit more at that point, but we'll see.
I hope so. And, still drinking that recovery water because I know you didn't drink enough water over the weekend. And that's okay. That's okay. We can try again next year. And then, Ben, not only are we saying happy birthday to you, but we do have to say happy Juneteenth, everyone. Woohoo! This really speaks to intersections. I think that the month of June, being Pride Month, being in Columbus Pride, being right here near Juneteenth every year really speaks to the intersectionality of my existence in particular and the existence of many, many people in our community that, a girl can get worn out being gay and Black all in 1 week.
Definitely. Now, Siobhan, I don't want to put you on the spot, and I'd be happy to talk about it myself, but for listeners who might not know what Juneteenth is or may only have heard about Juneteenth in passing, can you give us a little bit of a background on what Juneteenth is and what it celebrates and symbolizes?
Oh my goodness. So you are putting me on the spot, Ben, but I'm going to be very broad and brief with this. It is a celebration of the news of emancipation, making it to Texas, a community in Texas, and that happened on June 19th, well after the Emancipation Proclamation, right? That wasn't an immediate thing that happened. That news had to travel, and as you can probably imagine, did not travel very well in the South, and in Texas, the Deep South at that time. But on June 19th is the date that we recognize everyone. And that very inclusive, we're not free until all of us are free. So June 19th is that very clear recognition that is our freedom date, because that was when all of us knew of our freedom. And I don't know what year that is, Ben. What year is that?
Ooh, I'm not sure either.
Yep. Yeah, I put you on the spot there.
I want to say 1864, 1865?
Yep, something around there.
Yeah, the end
Something
of the
around
Civil
there.
War.
Yeah, exactly. But it is a celebration of freedom. It is a celebration of no longer being an enslaved people, and being in liberation. And it is something that isn't well known or wasn't well known for decades and for years. but that story of Juneteenth, that story of true liberation, is getting louder. It's getting louder here in our community here in Central Ohio. It's getting louder across the country. This is something that we saw during the pandemic, actually, during the summer of 2020, which is when I think I personally really got involved in Juneteenth celebrations here locally. And again, it is, June becomes a month of celebration of liberation, both as a Black person, a descendant of formerly enslaved people, and as a queer person who is living a life that is out and that is faithful, as we talk about here on Coming Out Christian. All right. Well, that's enough about us because we have an amazing guest today. Folks, I cannot wait to hear what he is going to share with us. Our guest, our first out of state guest, so welcome. That's amazing. Our first out of state guest is the Bishop Tim Wolfe. Who uses he, him pronouns. Tim is the son of Pentecostal pastors, and he likes to tell people he miraculously managed to come out of the closet with his faith intact. In the process of becoming, he was blessed to meet a number of faith leaders who were not homophobic or legalistic, and it was their influence that shaped his life. That's just beautiful. Sorry, that is a little aside. I just want to say that's a beautiful way to put that, Tim. For 7 years, Tim led Gather, a hybrid faith collective that bridged the pre and post pandemic shift in faith practice and expression. Since 2023, he has served as the bishop of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries Midwest region, where he leads a group of radically inclusive pastors and ministries across 9 states. He also manages a private practice in communications consulting. He holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Northwestern University and a master's of divinity from Chicago Theological Seminary. In his free time, he is doing a lot of work with amazing organizations like the Poor People's Campaign, the Children's Defense Fund. And all of this, he says, is possible through the loving support of his partner of 33 years, Walter, and their rambunctious cat, Milo. Thank you so much for being here with us, Tim. I did want to share that entire bio. It's wonderful background for who you are and why we wanted you to be here joining us today. So welcome.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be with you. I'm just excited about this whole conversation, about the work you all are doing in Central Ohio, about the spirit that I'm already feeling just in this moment. So it's just a blessing to be with you all, and I'm grateful for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you. And we always like to start off our conversations with our guests with a question, and that is, what is your testimony? What is your story at the intersection of queer identity and faith?
Uh, well, you hit some of it in the little press release thing that I sent to you, but that's my go-to. Really, I want folks to understand that I am deeply rooted in Pentecostal tradition, but at the same time, and in some ways, I could argue because of that, despite all efforts to the contrary, I was able to come out and never ever let go my faith. And so that was, I think, those of us that come from very intense Christian environments, whether they're Pentecostal, Catholic, you name it, right? Lutheran. I've got some Lutheran friends who are just, it's deeply embedded into them that this is who I am, and it's so formative to your identity that when you come into the better understanding of who you are, you're struggling to figure out, how do I hold on to that? Because I treasure this and I love this and it's so much a part of me, and who I now understand myself to be, and what my making, how I've understood my making. And so I was really blessed. You all were talking about age. I've got 20 years on everybody here, 20, 30 years on everybody here. And so I was coming of age at a very significant period in queer identity formation in the nation, in the world, right? Where we weren't talking about this outside of nicknames that you would get called whenever you couldn't, throw a softball or something. That was about as deep as queer language came into the conversation. Stonewall happens when I'm about 10 years old, but it's on the front page of the New York Times. Nobody's talking about it. These things are starting to emerge. And along the way, I have this understanding that the way I'm responding to some of the signals that the culture is sending me, which are very heteronormative signals, right? So people, when you, oh, you have a girlfriend? When are you gonna, those, all of those questions? My response keeps leading me a different direction, and it's nothing. I want to talk about lifestyle for one hot second. This is when I really have to ask for grace. When I'm around folks and they start asking me about my lifestyle, because that is sort of like, what kind of car do you drive and where do you choose to live?
Yes.
This was
Yes.
not this. I want to be very clear to anybody who may not understand this. Anybody who is genuinely gay, not adopting identities for chicness, but anyone who is genuinely gay will tell you this is not a choice. You are aware of it and know what's happening before you can even explain it to yourself. So in the middle of this, I am coming into adolescence and understanding that I'm getting different signals in places, and the way I'm understanding myself to be is not at all like all my buddies, my playmates up and down the street, right? And just work with that in your own mind, what that might mean. But in the middle of it all, along the way, I'm a preacher's kid. My parents are doing fierce work, and I'm so proud of them in underserved Chicago communities. These are the 60s and 70s, so they're dealing with gangs and runaways and teenage pregnancies, evictions, a lot of substance abuse and addiction. We had a room in our house that was set aside for folks who needed to get off of heroin, and my parents prayed and worked. So our house, I have over 50 foster brothers and sisters. There were so many people coming and going, homeless folks that would live with us. All of this is happening. This ministry is exemplary on many levels, and books have been written about it and all that kind of stuff. But in the middle of it all, I have this awareness that if I come out, my parents are going to lose everything.
Oh,
So what do I do? What do I do with this? And I love the way the Lord works, though, because while I'm dealing with that, I'm also toying with some really destructive thinking, because they could lose everything if I come out, or if I do myself in, they will be surrounded by sympathy, and I will no longer be a threat to them. And
mm,
I'm literally 15, 16 years old toying with suicidal ideation as a means of saving my parents and my family and their church and people that I love in the church. And in the middle of this, all through a long backstory, has something to do with me getting Aretha Franklin's Amazing Grace album and bumping into somebody who knew Chicago gospel really well, and me loving this music, saying, you need to get on down, you need to get on over to the South Side and get and hear music over there. It's all happening over in your town. Chicago's the hotbed for this. So I go over to the South Side to a church that has an 11 p.m. live radio broadcast called First Church of Deliverance, which is this massive church. They were a mega church before we had such a word. They were radically inclusive before we knew what that meant. Their pastor never disavowed any rumors about his own same gender loving identity. Other ministers were very open about it. There were people that would come in that were very, let's say, unconventional in their dress and affect. But it's Sunday night at 11 o'clock. There were 350 voices in the choir stand and over 1,000 people in every seat. And the church was, and the spirit was there, and all of this was going on. And I'm a 16-year-old kid who's bribing people to drive me before I get my own license and I'm able to be out after midnight, bribing people to take me. And I would go every week. I'd find a sucker who would take me every week, and I would go. In the middle of all of this, the youth pastor, and I'd gone longer than I intended, but I wanted somebody to hear this.
absolutely. Yes.
The youth pastor of that church, Reverend Eugene Gray, and I bless his memory, as he's truly one of my ancestors in faith. Reverend Gray just stood out in front of the church and opened his arms to me and said, "Come here, I need to pray with you." And after the service is over, it's midnight, everybody's piling out. We got to go to work the next morning. And he goes down there and he prays with me. He takes my hand. He was this great big man with a big walrus mustache. I mean, he was just bald, this kind of grandfatherly figure. And he prayed with me, and he got me up, and he planted Psalm 139 in my heart forever. He said, "Remember this, you're fearfully and you're wonderfully made. Nobody can change that. Know that you're fearfully and wonderfully made." And then he would look me in the eye, and sometimes tears would be coming down his cheek, and say, "And you can only serve a God if you believe that God does not make mistakes."
That is a word. That is a beautiful, beautiful, affirming
Right.
word.
Right. Otherwise, what's the point?
Absolutely.
And that set me on a course. And then it became for me, whatever the rest of y'all decide to do, it would be a sacrilege for me to either deny who I am or try to shield you from who I am. And then I got into the business of finding my way in the world and not apologizing. I was not always in a position to walk in the door and go, hello, like something out of La Cage aux Folles. I didn't have any of those moments. But what I did have was, I'm here. There will never be a lie about who I am. I'm not going to hide who I am. You want to ask at your own peril. I'm going to tell you the truth. And at the same time, don't expect me to do anything that's outside of the nature that God planted inside me. And then that also, by the way, put me on a wonderful track of exploration, because my own denomination, which shall remain, we won't give the name, but they were a white Pentecostal group, were buying into the Jerry Falwell not messaging. So I was seeing oppression in many, many levels begin to urge up, particularly against women and against LGBTQ folks. Seeing this normalized and seeing a myth of a heteronormative myth of the father breadwinner, the subversive, the submissive wife, the children, everybody, this weird hierarchy that we see in a lot of these environments, beginning God, pastor, daddy, mama, on down, and I moved over to the Black faith experience. Coming out of First Church, I moved to LA, got myself all involved in the largest Black Pentecostal church in Los Angeles, working under the amazing Bishop Charles Blake, and who taught me a whole lot about how to bishop. So not meaning to see that, but anyway, along the way, I met Bishop. I became good friends with the Hawkins, and because I was on the West Coast, and that's how I met Yvette Flunder before she was Reverend or Bishop or anything. She was just a stone singer and assistant pastor who could tear up Love Center, and then we went from there, and that's how I came into the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. I called her one day and I said, by then she was Bishop Flunder, I just need to tell you, I cannot escape this call of ministry on my life. I was writing a blog for queer identified Christians and their supporters called Straight Friendly, based on the premise that, what, we're called to love. And if we're going to wait for the church to get gay friendly, we just might as well just go sit this one out, because there will always be a reason not to have us. But
Wow.
if we
Yeah.
become straight friendly, then we're doing the work of Jesus, and we're not worried about the church. You do it at home. Just be straight friendly. Love on those folks. And love does not mean you have to allow, but love on them, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so consequently, that's how that went. So anyway, I called her up and I said, I just can't escape. I've been typing this community built around this blog. It's archived. I haven't touched it in many years, but there were hundreds of folks that would come and go, and all of this stuff would happen. And it was a daily blog, and all this was happening. And in the middle of everything, I said, I got to get into 3-dimensional ministry. I can't type my way into this kingdom. I need to do this work. And she said, well, you're going to seminary. First of all, you're going to get your theology straight. And then we're going to figure about how you plan and how you work. And that's how Gather was born. I went to seminary and Gather was born and all of that. And then I got this weird touch about you need to take a leadership position in TFAM. And that's how I landed where I am. That's the whole kit and caboodle. My husband, I met in a bar one night, and we've been together for 33 years. I'm also a big advocate of the one night stand, because a lot of good things can happen from that, but that's another story. That's a different podcast, maybe a different
Or maybe this podcast, who knows? Wow, I just want to say that is, I was riveted. I'm amazed. I am blessed to hear that story, Tim. That is amazing. There's so many different places we could go from there. But what I heard there was just that affirmation, that single voice of affirmation, and what that released in you. I mean, that opened the floodgates and allowed you to walk through the world as a creation, as a
Yes.
confident human being, and saying, no, I was created. You can have opinions about me, but I
Yeah.
was created.
Yeah.
which I think led to so many other beautiful things now with the planting of Gather, and then your leadership in with the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. I do want to go back though to, because you said something that just riveted me, where so many of us in the LGBTQ community struggle with suicidal ideation
Hmm.
and thoughts of
Yes.
harming ourselves. And there is a stat that I share when I'm doing training, and that is 3 out of 4
Hmm.
LGBTQ adults have considered suicide in their
Hmm.
life.
Hmm.
And that's not a hard stat for us as LGBTQ people to digest, but it can be a little bit surprising to others. And but the way that framing, that lie that was told to you, that
Hmm.
being here will harm my parents, leaving is the way to shield them from that. What got you out of that thinking? Was it that affirmation that you got, or was there more to it to get you out of that thinking? And then what got you to coming out to your parents?
Oh, the coming out story is its own funny little thing. We'll get to that in a minute. Um, but the way that I got there was kind of twofold. Number one, I was blessed to be in the presence of the good people at First Church, and of course they are also coming at this from a Black experience. So their music is always about coming out. How did you feel when you come out the wilderness, right? How I got over. My soul looks back and wonders how I got over. Trouble don't last always. These messages are embedded, and they are sorely missing in a lot of white faith expressions, because they're coming from a sense of entitlement and all is settled. So a white church can sing it as well, and it doesn't mean the same thing as it means when you're in a Black church, right? And so that kind of idea pulled me into an understanding of myself and my own journey, that it's a journey, right? It's a way of being and coming into and becoming. And so that was all part of it. I think that at the same time, I am laying in bed, I am more and more in my room by myself. And you have to understand, our house is campaign central, and church people are coming and going, and prayer meetings are breaking out, and this is happening and that's happening. And meanwhile, I'm off in my room, when I had my room, when somebody else didn't have my room, and I was forced into my brother's room because that was a lot of stuff going on. But I
Okay,
was
yeah.
myself, and I was really going through my anger at God, because
Did
it's like,
you, would you
I'm
say that
fine.
you wrestled with God?
Oh, I wrestled. I
Okay.
wrestled. And later on, when I got deeper in the Psalms and realized that about a third of them are that, just shaking your fist and going like, "Hey, what are you doing here? I wish you need to fix this."
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I was more at ease with it, but at first, because I had been told, don't question God, don't ask, and God only knows what people say He knows, right? Or God knows, right?
Hmm.
You understand? So that's that business, right? So we'll tell you what God knows, and don't you wrestle with God. And say, In the middle of it all, I was just praying, and I was very angry, and just saying, I didn't ask for this. I don't know what purpose it serves. I don't know why you would throw me at this with everything else I got going on. I'm dealing with all the things that everybody deals with, all the hormones and everything else. And in the middle of this, I'm in this state. I don't like it. And I thought you loved me. And why, and all of those things.
Yeah,
These
yeah.
would be really, I mean, I can see myself laid out across the bed, just sobbing and in my pillow so nobody can hear that I'm crying, right? And in the middle of it all, because I was grateful, and one of the great things about a Pentecostal upbringing, I'm going to say this, and I endorse this 100%, is you can be in a good Pentecostal church and not know scripture. There's no way you can do that. If you're in the right place, you know word, and you
Yeah.
know word in very real and vivid ways. So all of a sudden, I could hear the text in Paul where he says, I had this thorn in my flesh. That was something I couldn't figure out. I couldn't work around. And while we might bristle and try to make sure that everything would retrofit everything to where our minds are now, I embraced that idea that not in a negative sense, but this was something different about me, something that I could not explain, something that made me unlike most everybody I knew that weren't struggling with the struggles I was having. And God
Hmm.
said, don't worry about it. This is your weakness is how I become strong. My grace is sufficient.
Yes, yes.
And when I came up out of that, and it was my own little prayer time, when I came up out of that, it was like I can't count on anybody else anyway. This is sufficient grace for me, and
Right.
it's all I need. And then all of a sudden we'd be in these, Jesus rally kind of spaces, and they'd get that I have decided to follow Jesus stuff going, and the world, they'll all take the whole world but give me Jesus. If no one goes with me, still I will follow. And it meant something to me. It meant something. It's like if I gotta walk this alone, I'm gonna walk it alone. And then, of course, very quickly, I found out that there were a whole lot of other people in a lot of other churches that were homophobic that thought they were walking alone. And when we all started to find each other, things started to happen. And so
That's right.
but it was an epiphany of sorts, but it was also a dawning. And I think that sometimes we think that we either got to have a revelation or we got to suffer. But sometimes revelation sets a dawning into place, right? Where
Right.
it's a slow awakening to a spring awakening, if you will, into this way of being. And all of a sudden it is, yeah. So my big thing was like, and so when people get upset or try to tell me things like, wait, I'm good with God. I know that God's good with me. If you all can't get on this boat, I respect whatever you want to think because I love you and you're entitled. I respect your right to think however you want to think. I don't want you to think you can hurt me with this because we're settled over here.
Right. Yes.
With this
And
all
that's a
this,
good
yeah,
feeling, isn't it?
yeah,
When you're settled with God, like, oh no, no, no,
yeah,
God and I work this out. I see
yeah.
you haven't worked it out yet,
Yeah.
but
I mean,
we're good.
you're just going to have to deal with it. And I think of if you go back to scripture, you go back to all the prophets, they were a handful because they just never cared what anybody thought. That's what
True.
God
Yeah.
Jesus killed. All right. That's what God Jesus killed. Like, I don't care what you think. I'm going to do what I know is right. And I know who I am. And I know who I am in God. And so that's the way I came at it. So I was living this way for a long time. Now, my parents, claimed to have had no indication of anything until I told them. But then have to remind them that my eighth grade graduation gift was a Liza Minnelli concert. That the first record album I bought was the soundtrack to Oklahoma. That I was always the guy that was working redecorating his room, and I hate all those stereotypes, but they're stereotypes because they're true. And he's like, so how are you surprised with all of this, right? I did try to go the route of conforming for a while, and like fine, I met a lovely lady. I loved her deeply. And then I had to turn to her and say, we can't marry because
Yeah.
I will ruin your life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was the only way I could hold on to my integrity. So along the way, I'm living in LA. I'm 21. I'm out to finish my undergrad. Just living in LA, doing good things. And out of nowhere, the phone rings on a Saturday night. I hope you've got time for this story. It's kind of funny.
Oh,
Uh,
please. Yes.
Phone rings and it's mom and dad. You're in trouble when they're on the extensions,
Oh
right?
no. Yeah,
You know.
that's serious.
So I'm now like, yeah, I'm maybe 21, 22, somewhere in there. And I lived in this wonderful, almost like a Melrose Place kind of apartment building, And we had these great screen doors. They were old, classic, vintage screen doors out of wood. And so the apartment, if you were in it and it's LA, the apartment's always open. There's a garden out front. You want the breeze through the house. So this call comes, my screen door's open, and mom and dad said, we just have a question to ask you. And I said, well, if you ask, you're going to get the answer. So, you know, step gingerly unless you're ready to have this discussion, because I think I know what you're going to ask. And so they ask, and I answered, said, yeah, that's exactly what this is. And then all of the drama on the other end of the line, and we raised you better, and all this stuff gets started, and what are we going to do, and all these things happen. And in the middle of it all, my door swings open, and it's a buddy of mine from church, Randy, who is just one of those great, like, finger popping queens. You know what I'm saying? Just here he comes. Randy was the one. He went to the barber every Saturday before church because no hair could be out of place. That boy, right? Went to the gym, had this gym body, looked all butch until he opened his mouth. Everything about him was wonderful.
Love
And
Randy. Okay. Yep.
I love Randy. And Randy walked in the door, and I just covered the receiver because this is back in the day when you had the big phones. And I covered the receiver. I'm coming out to my parents. And he just hollered and said, he just actually went. I was in the living room. He went into the bedroom and just fell across the bed and said, oh, Jesus. give him strength, and then tell him and tell him you can't be too long because you got a fine man who's come by your house, and just leave
Oh,
him at that.
oh,
And that was
Wow.
so. While my parents are having this meltdown, which they fully intended to call me, it was performative. While they're doing this, I've got a running commentary coming from the other room.
that's almost better than not having that. I mean, I have to
Yeah, it was
imagine
just
that that was
wow.
some comic relief for you that got you through it.
He was just like, dude, and of course, none of it was true. He and I were not in any kind of relationship or anything. He was just playing with this whole thing, and this, the worst. They're imagining the worst. Just tell them all kinds of sin and iniquities happening around here,
Right.
and he just kept kind of running this, and so it actually eased that moment for me. It did not ease it for them. And
No,
so
no.
once came back to Chicago many years later and met Walt, and we'd been together for about 10 years, they called again. And this time it was more of an ultimatum. You've got to get right with God. And I said, I am right with God. And they were like, no, you're not. And it's like, well, unless God, are you calling to tell me God's dead? I'm trying to understand what this call is. You're telling me God is dead and that you are now, you have taken over that position. How do you know what's right with God? How is that possible?
Wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
in all of that, what happens is my mother got very, very angry. My mother is a little more emotional than my father. My father was wounded, and he said something meaning to be loving, but was very hurtful. And he said, "Well, I've already told God I don't need to go to heaven if you're not going to be there."
Oh, oh my.
Hmm. Hmm.
Oh, oh my. Mm.
And again, here I am in trying to the care of my parents, right?
Yes, yes. It's right back there again. Somehow you
Right
are
back,
becoming
I'm
responsible.
responsible for them.
Yeah.
And I said, Daddy, don't, that's not a concern you should have.
Right.
I have every intention. And then my mother was, well, you're not going to get to heaven like this. And da, 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 da. And she slammed down the phone, and I didn't speak to them for a year.
Hmm.
And they would call and leave messages and wail and on, please call. Even Walt, who they would not acknowledge. He's got the double threat of being my gay partner and African American. These are Southern white people, so there's all kinds of
Oh,
cross currents here, right? All this is happening, and even Walt, who they won't acknowledge, for 10 years, he's saying you need to call them back. It's just too much pain. My brother, everybody's go, please, please. And it's like they hung up on me.
mm.
And I'm really tired of doing this dance with them. It's a death dance for me. I'm tired of it. And then the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me in that way that, as Pentecostal folk, we know when the Spirit's speaking.
We
And
do.
it was almost
Yes.
like grabbed me by the back of my neck and said, hold on a second. It is not a requirement that you be loved. That's a nice to have. That's not a have to have. The people love you and accept you. That is not a requirement in any of this. The requirement is that you love. And
Ooh.
has it ever occurred to you that maybe you are the one in this situation that's supposed to do the loving and the accepting you? What are you asking for? And then I'm hearing all of Jesus's teachings. No, you give, you do, you, all of those things. And it's like, you got this thing twisted because you're waiting. You can't be a Christian. You can't do anything until they love you. That's not how this rolls. You become a Christian when you start loving them. And then you learn, because Jesus also taught he did great boundary training, and where you draw some lines to make sure that you are protected and that you're acknowledged and you're holy yourself. But it's not their job to do that for you.
Right. Our work is to do the loving. Our work is to love. That is our work.
To do the loving, not in both directions, right?
Right.
Because if it's not coming from there, you've also got to sort of parent yourself in many ways
Yes. Yes.
and set up your own boundaries. And so that's how the blog Straight Friendly, it was an epiphany for me. That's how the blog Straight Friendly got born. And that's what catapulted me into ministry. And I will say this to somebody who may be hearing that harm and that pain that you're feeling, God will turn that around. I promise you. and put you on a direction towards safety and productivity that is generative, that turns you into a blessing for others, not for the
Amen.
ones that are harming you. They've
Right.
cut themselves off, but you can just watch God work in your life and see how the pain, none of that is ever wasted.
Mm-hmm.
I don't invite pain. I don't welcome pain. I don't believe that we are called to suffer. I reject that. I think that that's bad theology. But we will suffer. Jesus didn't say you're called to suffer. He said you will suffer.
Okay. Yes.
You
Yes.
see, big difference there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't believe in self-appointed martyrs, but I know that we will suffer. And in the middle of it, as Walt always tells me, there are no victims. There are only volunteers. And meaning that, you know what, if you just lay over and let what people do to you stop you, you have signed up for that yourself. Otherwise, what happens is I'm going to keep whatever you're doing to me. See, that just pisses me off, frankly. I got to just say that. Whenever folks come at
Yeah.
me, just pisses me off and just says, "Well, we're gonna do it. We're gonna find a better way."
Mm-hmm.
That's how that works. And so that became the catapult that moved me into writing about my faith and blogging about my faith. And all of a sudden, these people found me. They were all people from all over the world. They were in this huge community. We suffered together. We helped folks out. We talked to one another. People went into the ministry. I went into the ministry. All sorts of things happened because my father spoke his pain in a way that was very hurtful and could have been thought harmful if I'd allowed it to land that way to me. So I'm
Wow.
always telling my folks, and I don't mean that in a super possessive way, uh, but in the folks that I'm blessed to work with and lead, some things we need to remember, and these are lessons that have been born out of my own experience. Forgiveness is not permission.
Mm. Okay, that's a
I,
word right there.
I can forgive you because I need to get around you.
Mm-hmm.
That does not mean that I remain open to you continuing to do harm to me.
Absolutely.
Okay. That is an invitation to abuse.
Right.
And
Right.
then abuse leads to trauma. And then trauma requires so much healing that you might never get yourself back on the field where God wanted you to be. So
Right.
forgiveness is not permission. You did this to me. We're acknowledging it. Whether or not you accept it, I might have to come at you from a place of mercy instead of authentic forgiveness, because authentic forgiveness presumes that the person is regretful of the work that they've done, that they are repentant. But
Mm-hmm.
not everybody will repent. So I need to come at you with just mercy.
Ooh.
It's my mercy, by my mercy, that what you're doing is not going to toxify me or wound me or whatever. I mean, I'm going to take I'm going to take the bruises, but you're not going to cut into me and take my heart. You can't have that.
Right.
So this is mercy or forgiveness, but it's not permit. You can't come at me another way. And if you start, I can't help it. I don't mean it. I need grace. All those other things. It's like, I'm sorry. We're shut. We're closed. We're close to this. So we're going to have to redefine how we engage one another. Doesn't mean I'm throwing you away, but we are redefining our relationship because you can't have this access to this side of me ever again. The other thing I tell them is that tolerance is not indulgence. I can tolerate you where you are in your weakness and your ignorance and your unwillingness or whatever those words are. And I don't mean those in negative senses. These are just things that happen. But that does not mean that every time I see you, I got to put up with that baloney. And I almost used another word because in
And you
TFAM,
can. You can. We you know what? We do love Jesus, but we cuss a little.
well,
You
I'm going to
know?
tell you what I'd use they're in the language. Let's use them, right? But if you bring that shit to my door a second time, it's going to be like you can't come to the door no more.
There we go.
You can't
That's
be
it.
sneaking up the house. We can't have it. I'm sorry, and I'm not embarrassed to tell people that. And the last thing I'll do, and then I'm going to shut up because I've done all the talking. Is that I want to also give anybody that's listening to this that's dealing with any kind of religious oppression, spiritual violence, legalistic bigotry, well, however you want to frame the stuff that a lot of, and I'm going to say this, well-meaning Christians who are only in it for the fire insurance, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Woo,
Okay?
the fire insurance.
The
Say that
fire
again.
insurance, right? All they're worried about is keeping you out of hell. And so that's their meaning, because that's all they're worried about. They haven't done anything for the world they live in. They just keeping you out of hell. All right. That's and God bless them. That's their understanding. Those are their intentions. So we're going to let them have that. But when they come at you and they come at you with the verse, the scripture and verse, which they have not done the homework on themselves, a preacher has told them about. Let's be very clear about that. They're just mouthing what they've been
Amen.
told. If they had done the work, they'd know better than to come at you with it. But they haven't done the work on the text. They come to you with this. Your right, well within your right, is to say, I don't believe that. That's all you got to say. I don't believe that. I understand where you're coming from, but when I read that, that's not what I hear. That's not what I see. I don't believe that. I know better.
Absolutely.
I don't believe what you're saying. Well, you have to believe it. Otherwise, you'll go to hell and say, yeah, I don't believe that either.
Right. Right.
So let's talk about those Buckeyes or something. That's what we
There you go. You know what, that is the best way to get out of any kind of conversation here in Ohio. How about those Buckeyes?
How about those Buckeyes? But it's like, we're not going to get into this is what it says and this is what it says. And when you pull out the Hebrew, because first of all, unless you've done a lot of deep seminary work, which I was privileged to be in the company of some brilliant minds that taught me that, but not everybody's equipped to do that. And the lay folks, gay lay folks, should not try to. You have to understand, folks that are coming at you with scripture are so deeply indoctrinated and so sure that they've got the pipeline to the truth that it's a fruitless conversation. And the whole reason why they're raising it up is to show that they've got some kind of intellectual, moral, scriptural authority over you. And they do not.
That's right.
They just don't have it.
Right.
All right.
Right.
Besides these readings that they're so clean about, they're only about 100 years old at the oldest.
If that.
There was no
Right.
such
Yeah.
thing as a homosexual identity until the turn of the 20th century. So I don't know why they think that the ancients were so concerned about this. But that's another story for another time. In the end of it, it is, I don't believe, I know what you're saying, and I've been raised around this, and I've heard this before, but I don't believe it.
That's right. That's right.
I also have been raised around leprechauns. Okay. All right. They were on cereal boxes when I was growing up. Showed up in, I don't believe in leprechauns.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah. Tim, this has been absolutely amazing. Thank you for sharing that story of your wrestle with God, of coming out to your parents. I just want to acknowledge that and pull into context what you told us about your parents and about their pretty radical love
Yes.
for pretty much everyone. Their level of love, their level of inclusion, their level of grace, and believe that grace was abundant and could do many miraculous things. And somehow, some way, for so many people, grace is insufficient for the gay. And that is, it's so sad because I serve a God for whom grace is sufficient for the. If gay were a problem, gay wouldn't be a problem for my God. If gay were a problem, I don't believe gay is a problem.
The problem is not being gay. The problem is accepting your making. You see, that's where we need grace.
Yes.
Once we get grace, God, give me the grace to accept how you made me.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll go back to that first chapter where it says, and God saw it and it was good.
That's right. That's right.
So I didn't mean to cut you off, but that's the challenge. It's not that God has grace for me being gay any more than God has grace for me being white. Although sometimes I know more grace is needed. But you understand what I'm saying? Or for being male, or for being American, or for whatever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then I love the phrase fire insurance because so many of us have been prayed for and are being prayed for, our souls. And let me tell you, it's painful. I think it is actually painful for queer folks to be told over and over again, I am praying for your soul. I am in anxiety. I am in upheaval over your immortal soul. And I need you to get this fire insurance policy, the one that I have purchased, because it's the only one that can save you from this inevitable fire. And that in itself does. And I believe that folks think it's loving. They think it is an absolutely loving Christ-like thing to do, to be praying for the souls of queer folks. And in fact, we don't need those prayers. Those prayers, please, those prayers are needed for others. And please don't tell us that you're praying for our souls, because you're not telling us what you think you're telling us,
It's
unfortunately.
an outgrowth of country club religion.
Yeah,
Okay, you've got to meet these standards to belong to our club.
that's right.
That's all it is. And there's no mark. Listen, if you watch television at all, if you watch broadcast television at all, every third ad is a pharma ad that tells you all the reasons why you need to get this
Yes.
and be afraid. Is your depression medication not working? Then you need this medication that will help your medication to work.
Yes.
It is that same mentality. Okay, there are two ways that this works, because I'm a marketer in my day job, right? You either create fear and phobia and anxiety that would make you reach for a product, or else you create an incentive that says this is going to make your life better. This car is going to be safer. This
Mhm.
this lawn treatment is going to get rid of more of your weeds. Or else, are your neighbors looking at your yard and saying, what a skanky family this is? They can't keep the weeds out their yard. Your dandelions are. There's two approaches to this, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
American evangelical faith and American Catholic faith have both capitalized on the negative. There's a technical term for it. I can't even remember it off the top of my head. The not the improvement story,
Right.
but
Right.
on the be afraid, be very afraid story.
Yes.
And we carry that in us
Oh, so much.
until we realize that Jesus didn't teach that. Jesus said, if you
Whew.
come to me, I'm not going to throw you away. I will life more abundantly. I've told you these things that your joy may be full. In this world, you're going to have troubles and trials. Don't be afraid. These are the words of Jesus.
The two words that he tells us the most. Do
Yes.
not fear. Do
Don't
not be afraid.
yeah.
And yet the incentive that we are being sold over and over again is fear of fire.
It's a
Even
marketing
though
strategy.
it
It's a
is.
marketing strategy. It puts
Yeah.
butts in seats, because it also gets you to a position where if I've got my insurance, then I need to come and celebrate the fact that I've got mine. And there's no conversation about what am I doing down here? How am I loving my neighbor? How am I caring for the stranger? How am I worrying about those that are unjustly in prison? How am I dealing with the very things Jesus said, the Spirit of the Lord's upon me? God has anointed me to do these things, to
Yeah.
bring news to the poor. And helping the poor is not doing turkey dinners on Thanksgiving.
Well,
Helping the poor is to make sure that they live in a place in an elevated state that is equal with you. The early church sold everything they had and made sure that everybody came at this thing equally. We have a name for it that in the mid-century we're afraid of, communism, but that's basically a socialist agenda was what the early church embraced. And it enabled them to survive. It enabled them to survive a regime, an oppressive imperial regime, and outlast the Caesars themselves.
yeah.
All right.
It's you say that, Tim, and Ben can attest to this. I heard a Catholic teaching earlier this year, and when I was sitting listening to this set of Catholic principles, and it was going through my head, do they know this is socialism?
It's
Like,
socialism.
and I went to Ben because Ben is my Catholic friend, even though Ben is. I don't think
Yeah.
Ben actually identifies as actively Catholic any longer,
Mhm.
but he is the person that I know that I can go to. Also, my wife. My wife was raised Catholic, but Ben has a little bit more experience there. And I said, Ben, do Catholics know that they're socialists? I mean, it was a very
Yeah.
interesting moment for me because all of the principles that they were attesting to were about care for the poor, speaking up for the marginalized, making sure that we're not oppressing those, caring for the earth, doing all these things. And I said, whoa, that's a really neat concept. I wish I knew more. I wish I knew more about that Catholic Church. I wish I saw that Catholic Church showing up more in our world.
Well,
Or
and
maybe do socialists know that they're Christian?
Again, coming out Christian. And this is the whole podcast, right? Ben, what were you going to
Right.
say?
well, no, I was just going to add that. I mean, that is the Catholic Church that also gives. I mean, that's Catholic social teaching. That's the same Catholic Church, the same expression of that church that gives us the Catholic intellectual tradition, which, if you boil down the Catholic intellectual tradition, you come to one thing invented by Catholic scientists, really, or scientists who happen to be Catholic, which is the scientific method.
Right.
I
Mhm.
mean, the
Yes.
scientific
Yes.
method is a product of scientists who are Catholic, looking at the Catholic intellectual tradition and saying, "Hey, we can apply this to science."
Mhm.
Yes. Yes.
That is not the
It's
Catholic Church we typically see, but that's all embedded in what the Catholic Church is. It's one of those things that, I mean, I'm not running back to Roman Catholicism anytime soon, but it's one of the pieces, along with Catholic social teaching, that makes me continue to respect certain elements of the church that raised me, of the church that I continue to identify somewhat with.
mhm.
I mean, it's not an expression of church that I'm going back to anytime soon, or a institutional church I want to go back to anytime soon. But at the same time, it nevertheless keeps me, and I would argue many queer or otherwise disaffected Catholics, interested in that tradition.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But now that I've jumped in, I am going
Yes.
to unfortunately rein us in a little bit because we've had this wonderful conversation, but we're also running almost up into the hour. So with that in mind, if I can prompt you, Siobhan, to perhaps do our query of the day. So unfortunately, it looks like Siobhan's audio might have cut out. So using her notes, I will go ahead and ask our query of the day. And it looks like what Siobhan was planning gets back to something, Bishop Tim, you said earlier, and how you were brought up both in the white and in the black Pentecostal tradition.
Mhm.
So, is there a piece of music, a piece of art, something from your background in the church that still really resonates with you today?
Well, that's a loaded question because it just is, as you know, there are so many different expressions. There are types of Black gospel that just speak to me as as somebody raised in, who grew in the Black Pentecostal tradition. I love the Old Testimony call and response songs. That tears a church up. So I get joy when I think about what he's done for me. That old saint stuff. I love that. But lately, because in the period that we're in right now, in the way that the world keeps taking shape, and a lot of it at the behest of white Christian nationalists who are trying to pretend that they're under the mantle, let's say white heteronormative Christian nationalists, doing this in the mantle of Christian faith. And I'm looking and I get all frustrated. I just keep hearing, and especially Thomas Whitfield's version of this. And if you don't know Thomas Whitfield, we call him the maestro in gospel music. He does things that are just unheard of. The old song, we'll understand it better by and by. By and by, we'll know all about it. By and by. So the verses were tossed and driven on the restless sea of time, summer skies and howling tempest oft succeed the bright sunshine. But in that land of perfect day, when the mists are rolled away, we'll understand it better. For me, that's not heaven necessarily. There is clarity that's coming. Clarity is coming even in our own lifetimes. I look forward to heaven and I like that idea a whole lot, but I'm not living for that. I'm living for what we can do right here, right now. So by and by is a daily prayer for me.
Bishop Tim, thank you so much for that. Unfortunately, again, it looks like we've completely lost Siobhan. So I will try to talk a little bit about my background with the Black Church. Unfortunately, my experience with a with the real Black Church experience is limited, and it's limited to my experiences with Middle Collegiate Church in New York and with Jackie Lewis and others there. That's a very multicultural church rooted in that same kind of Black church experience, but still a multicultural expression nevertheless. Um, so no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm becoming more and more a someone who appreciates and follows gospel music, but I'm still very new to this. Um, So no, I don't have one I can put my finger on. I've also been told recently that I have yet to learn the difference between white gospel music and black gospel music. So I really hate that we don't have Siobhan on for this part of the podcast, because I'm sure she'd have some great commentary on my total lack of experience with the black church, my lack of experience with songs and hymns that speak to a very different expression than I grew up with in Roman Catholicism. That said, we will now move on to our moment in queer Christian history, where we remember that we have always been here and we've always been here in the church. So I had something else planned, but we didn't get to one piece in our discussion with Tim, and I'm kind of going to put you on the spot, Tim. But I was wondering if you could tell our listeners a little bit more about TFAM, and particularly, if I'm not mistaken, this is TFAM's 25th anniversary this year. So maybe if you could also tell our listeners a little bit more about how TFAM got started.
Oh, absolutely. I'll be brief. It's a great story. TFAM began in actually started kind of simultaneously around the country as predominantly African American queer people were feeling a call into ministry and were moving and were, there was a period where they would let queer people do anything in the church as long as they didn't tell anybody. It was a don't ask, don't tell thing, and they, oh, your gifts make room for you. Well, not really, because you're not making room for me. But anyway, so there were people. There was this movement to break away from it, and in San Francisco, in particular, where Love Center was in Oakland, Love Center was in Oakland, the Hawkins Church, and Yvette Flunder was the assistant pastor there. She got deeply involved. She's the same gender loving woman. Got deeply involved in her work with HIV/AIDS victims and the trans community. And she realized that both of those groups, even if they were self-accepting, and even if there were churches that were accepting, which now, like you had places like Glide Memorial and that kind of stuff, they still were very apprehensive about going to those spaces. So she began to work, and she created a church there called City of Refuge, which later aligned itself with the United Church of Christ. Most of our churches in TFAM are aligned with the United Church of Christ as for denominational support. And in the middle of it all, other churches began popping up, and they all got together in Philadelphia 25 years ago in the basement of a church and said, look at us. Look at who's here. My, oh my, we're all trying to do the same thing. We've all heard from heaven in different places, but the message is the same. And they began to work, and this fellowship came into being. And then we decided, then there was a question of how do we create places of comfort, particularly for African American people who have fled the oppressive environments of their home churches, but still what they love about the church. So we took some of that stuff and made it our own, including the idea of bishops and so pastors of pastors, the idea of some of the liturgical moves. And then we widened our gates because we decided we're going to be radically inclusive. That means we have to speak many languages at the same time. And so we speak super duper Christian, like Black Pentecostal Christian a lot of the time. We speak United Church of Christ Christian. We also speak Unitarian Universalist. We also speak to some of the other ancient traditions from Africa. They all have space. And so there's a nice confluence of what happens when we come together. And we all are doing work, deep activism, deep work in church organization. I'll be this weekend in Michigan. Not it'll already happened by the time this airs, but preaching for one of our churches there. We get out and about, we try to build the community so that this vision that began as a ministry to deeply disenfranchised and oppressed and alienated communities, that ministry that was born there throws a much wider net. We're also deeply involved in Africa, particularly East Africa, where there are laws. So we are running effectively underground railroads to get folks out of Uganda and Rwanda and the Congo. We're working deeply in Kenya to set up safe houses for them, creating ways for them, apparently not to get into America lately, but to get into other places. We're doing that kind of work. We're also in Asia, in Singapore, where there's a large trans community. Our churches, I love our churches in Asia. There's a deep commitment to the not just the trans community, but the trans sex worker community, and making sure that they have a spiritual home, because that's how they're surviving. We have work in Latin America, so it's just wherever we land, that's where we work, and that's kind of been the attitude of it. So it's organized, but not too, if that makes sense. Often to our own detriment, but anyway.
Thank you so much. Well, this has just been such a great episode, such a great conversation between us and you, Bishop Tim. I really have to say, as someone who's new to TFAM, who is one of your people here in the Midwest region of TFAM, I'm so happy that you took us up on our invitation to come and be on this podcast and share your wisdom, share your experience. And I'm really looking forward to our time together, as you've said before, in 3D in Atlanta this summer.
Well, thank you. That means a lot to me, and it's a blessing to be here with you all. And the work that you're doing, I'll just get all Bishopy here for a minute and just bless this work. Amen. There is growth. There will be growth. Your reach is going to extend beyond what you already. As the old saints like to say, God's about to expand your territory. Just get ready.
Well, once again, thank you so much, Bishop Tim, for being with us today. And thank you, Siobhan. I'm so sorry we lost your part of this conversation. This is something that I'm going to have to fix in editing down the road. But thank you for being such a great co-host once again. And thank you to our listeners, wherever you might be. Definitely check out radicallyinclusive.org and the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. When you'll be hearing this in June, there might still be time to book rooms and register and come down and be with us in such a joyful gathering in Atlanta. To everyone listening, thank you again so much. And this has been another episode of Coming Out Christian. Thank you for listening to Coming Out Christian with Siobhan Boyd Nelson and me, Ben Hillscamp. Do you want to see content like this continue to be produced? Then please support Love Boldly with a donation and consider becoming a monthly donor. You can donate online at www.loveboldly.net/donate. Join us next time as we continue to engage with people who proudly say that we're here, we're queer, and we love the Lord. And we're not going anywhere.